Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jillian Bender-Cormier. I'm brand manager with Bender Insurance Solutions. We want to welcome you to our educational Bender U webinar, Cyber Liability Explained, Hacking Trends of 2022. Some housekeeping notes. At the end of this webinar, we will have an engaging Q&A session that I will be facilitating. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box or in the Q&A section. During the Q&A time near the end of the presentation, I will be sharing your questions with our speaker. We want to be conscious of time, so if we don't get to answer all of your questions, we will gladly reach out to you individually after the webinar. You are all in listen-only mode and will remain muted throughout today's session. This webinar is being recorded. Later today, the recording link, as well as a copy of the slide deck, will be forwarded to you. We have an incredible expert sharing with us this morning, but I'll let our own technology risk advisor, Brian Murray, have the honor of introducing him. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Jillian. Yeah, it is my honor to introduce our speaker today. This is Bo Bekele. He has spent the past 6.5 years specializing in cyber insurance exclusively. So Bo joined Evolve about 3 years ago. Evolve just won Advisen's Cyber MGA of the Year award. Actually, their third year in a row winning that. So he joined them about 3 years ago after working in London for a Lloyd's wholesale broker, and he focused on building cyber insurance programs there for Fortune 500 companies. And the 2 years in London provided Bo critical understanding of coverages, exposures, and the intricacies of the international cyber insurance market. And then upon his return to California, Bo became a licensed insurance broker, worked for a retail brokerage firm. He advised specifically technology and venture capital firms on all lines of insurance in San Francisco. Now based in Southern California, Bo has spent the last 3 years running Evolve's West Coast territory and focuses on educating insurance brokers and business owners on cyber trends, exposures, and ways to successfully manage cyber risk. So honored to have Bo with us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Brian. So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to today's cyber webinar. Really excited to be talking to you guys all about, some of the hacking trends we're seeing in the marketplace. So for those of you who are unaware, Evolve MGA is a cyber specialist insurance market. So we provide some of the broadest cyber coverages that are currently available, which is really beneficial to our end policyholders because having extremely comprehensive coverage minimizes the likelihood of any business needing to pay any additional costs out of pocket when a cyber attack occurs. Now, since the solely line of insurance that we provide is cyber, we've really been able to look and drill down into offering an extremely comprehensive program. So not only are we offering extremely comprehensive coverage, we also add 5 free risk management services that our policyholders have access to really help reduce the frequency or severity of attacks. Now, we also have one of the largest cyber-specific claims teams of any cyber insurance carrier. Now, we have around 90 in-house professionals. That includes in-house forensics investigators. We have some data breach attorneys and some ethical hackers that are ready to assist our policyholders the moment that they have a claim. We also have a super streamlined quote to bind process and a ton of claims examples that really help educate brokers on the exposures that they face in today's marketplace. So what are we going to talk about today? The point of the presentation is to fill you guys in on the current cyber landscape. Over the last few years, specifically due to the pandemic and the shift to remote working, hackers have, there's been a lot of opportunities for hackers, and we've seen a massive uptick in claims. So I'm going to be reviewing our top 2 cyber attacks with you. We're going to be going through some claims examples. I'm going to talk about how the increased claims has affected the cyber insurance market and what some of the other cyber insurance carriers are doing to respond to being inundated with a heightened level of claims. And then we're going to wrap up today's presentation with some takeaways in regards to some cyber hygiene best practices to hopefully help you all stay secure in this time of heightened claims. So to help simplify it, or to kind of start off with the basics here, I just want to talk about what is cyber insurance. So cyber insurance is a policy that helps protect a business's intangible assets, and it can protect a business from a range of cyber threats, including data breaches, ransomware attacks, other viruses, or even system failures and fraudulent transfers. Now, in the cyber insurance world, cyber can be relatively confusing because there's not a standardized form. And you have all these different cyber insurance carriers offering, some sort of cyber policy, and they have different coverages and different definitions. So it can be really difficult to track exactly who's covering what. So to help simplify this for you all, no matter the cyber carrier in the marketplace, every single cyber policy is going to be split into two coverage sections. You're gonna have your first party coverages and your third party coverages. So third party coverages are intended to cover all of the costs if the business is sued as a result for passing along a virus to a third party or losing people's information. So it typically is triggered via a lawsuit. So maybe there is a data breach and the business is hit with a class action. Or if the business doesn't notify by the correct state notification laws, they could get hit with a regulatory investigation. So the third-party coverages will always cover defense costs and settlements of any potential lawsuit or investigation. On the flip side, you have your first-party coverages. So the first-party coverages are going to cover all of the costs that come directly out of the business's pocket when they suffer a cyber loss. So if there is, say, a data breach or a hacker gets into your systems, the business typically needs to engage specific professionals like an IT forensics firm or a data breach attorney to help resolve that incident. These professionals charge hourly billables. That's a cost coming out of the insured's pocket. If the business is hit with ransomware, paying an extortion demand or paying the cost to rebuild IT infrastructure or recreate data, that's a cost coming out of the business's pocket. If someone accidentally wires $50,000 to the wrong bank account because a hacker intercepted that invoice, that's going to be another loss coming out of the business's pocket. So where we look at our claim statistics over the last few years, over 96% of the costs that we're paying out in all of our claims are first-party costs or coverages. So as a potential investor into a cyber insurance policy, it's critical that you are looking to invest or partner with a carrier that has extremely comprehensive first-party coverages to, again, minimize the likelihood of having to pay any additional costs out of pocket when a claim occurs. Now, that's one of the really unique things about Evolve's cyber policy form is we have some of the broadest first-party coverages that are currently available in the marketplace. So now I want to kind of take a step back and give you guys some insights on what the macro perspective or what the cybercrime industry looks like from a macro perspective level. So for those of you who do not know, the FBI actually releases an internet crime report every single year where they aggregate all of this data relating to cyber attacks happening here in the US. Every time we deal with a cyber attack, we have to notify the FBI. And in their 2021 Internet Crime Report, it had some really interesting statistics. So as you can see on the top left of your screen, you can kind of see the trend of the frequency and severity of cyber attacks that are affecting businesses and individuals here in the US. So the gray bar is going to be the frequency, red bar will be severity. But as you can kind of see, in 2021, the FBI received over 847,000 complaints of a different cyber attack. Now, when you break that down per day, that means the FBI is receiving over 2,300 new complaints every single day. Now, a lot of these cyber criminals are coming from overseas, whether that's Russia or China or North Korea. And every time we notify the FBI, we have to follow the money. And in the FBI's investigation, now they're relying on these foreign governments to uphold that investigation and actually go after these guys. And so that's why it's been very, very difficult to, actually penalize or, go after these hackers. Some other interesting stats is just the severity. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a massive increase in, the severity of these cyber attacks. And in this report, the FBI actually breaks down the attacks per state and the losses per state. And year after year, California is consistently the #1 targeted state. So just by doing business in California or being domiciled in California, you're already going to have a larger target on your back. That makes sense. California is one of the world's largest economies. But as you can see in 2021, California businesses and individuals suffered losses of upwards of $1.2 billion, and it almost doubled from 2020. So, these hackers, there's a really low barrier at entry for them to, steal funds from businesses. And this is an entire industry that a lot of people just aren't really thinking of on the day-to-day. Now, while these stats are great from that macro perspective, a lot of you might be thinking, maybe I'm a smaller business. Why would a hacker actually want to target me? So, what we've seen is over 60% of the attacks that occur, hackers are specifically targeting small to mid-sized businesses. And I think around 44% of the attacks are happening on companies under 100 employees. Hackers have kind of shifted their focus from targeting the Fortune 500 companies to small to mid-sized businesses, because at the end of the day, hackers are looking for a quick payday. And a lot of the times, small to mid-sized businesses are going to be the lower hanging fruit. And the reason why that is because a lot of the time, small to mid-sized businesses, they might have tight IT budgets, so they really haven't thought seriously about investing in strong IT security. A lot of the times they're more vulnerable to wire transfer fraud or social engineering attacks because maybe there's no protocols in place to verify whether when there is a request to change bank account details. And one of the other largest things is we're seeing smaller businesses being a gateway into larger organizations. So if there's any attendees on the call that do work with larger Fortune 500 companies or municipalities or large hospitals or school districts, what happens if there's an attack that stems on one of your employees' computers and then that virus gets spread to one of your larger clients? A great example here was the Target breach that happened back in 2013. I don't know if you guys are aware, but it was actually an HVAC contractor that allowed the hackers access and entry into Target systems, where then the hackers pushed malware to Target's POS devices and stole upwards of 40 million credit card details, all due to an HVAC contractor. Now, to help simplify what exposures businesses actually face, here are 4 points that, no matter the industry, puts a business at risk of a cyber loss. There's a lot of misconceptions around cyber insurance, and a lot of businesses feel they only need to invest in a cyber policy if they store heightened amounts of sensitive information. But unfortunately, that's not the case. There is no industry that is immune to cyber attacks, and we are seeing every industry under the sun suffering claims in today's marketplace. So the first and foremost exposure is, do you collect sensitive data? Each state has their own notification laws, and if the business does lose their clients' or employees' sensitive information, they are required legally to notify. Now, a lot of businesses think, if I store my data in the cloud via a third-party cloud provider like Dropbox or Ignite or Amazon Web Services, we don't have any liability. Again, that is not the case, because as the business, you are legally the data owner that is responsible for protecting that information. And the unique thing about the cyber policy is it does not just cover electronic data breaches. It also includes paper data breaches. So, if someone broke into the office and stole sensitive documents, or if someone loses a laptop on a train, it could be an actual or suspected data breach. Now, the other exposure here that a lot of businesses don't think about is the business critical data that they need regular access to that they are storing on their computers. So if you're a manufacturer, that could be your intellectual property for your product designs, or maybe you're using technology to actually produce your goods. If you're a distributor, maybe it is your the inventory levels in your warehouse or your logistics schedules. You know, what happens if you don't have access to that business critical data? Are you going to be able to fulfill your obligations to your clients or your customers? Now, this ties into the second point, and that is we are in the 21st century, and every single business today relies on technology to operate. We're all using computers. We're all corresponding with our clients and vendors via email. So what happens if a business gets hit with an attack like ransomware and it locks up all of your computer systems? You might end up breaching your contracts, and it might end up causing you to lose your clients as a result. So it ends up having a ripple effect. And, you know, for smaller businesses, you know, where there is an interruption in your cash flow, that could be detrimental to your bottom line and your long-term or your longevity in the long term. The third point here is every single business is performing financial transactions. Most businesses out there are sending and receiving invoices electronically and making payments by ACH or wire transfers. Hackers are consistently looking to intercept those payments and divert funds to fraudulent offshore accounts. Now, the fourth and most important exposure here that a lot of businesses don't realize is the human error element to cyber risk. Now, a lot of businesses think that, you know, if we invest in strong IT security, we're good to go. And unfortunately, having strong IT security and technological defenses, while it's imperative for your day-to-day security, it does not make the business 100% bulletproof. Over 90% of the attacks that have occurred in the last year, hackers have relied on human error to gain access into systems. So instead of these threat actors targeting systems and infrastructure, they're way more focused on targeting people, their roles, the data that they have access to, and ultimately the likelihood of someone clicking here. So to help simplify this even further, there are two exposures that put a business at risk of our top two claims. So to give you guys some insight on our claim statistics, around 35% of our claims from a frequency standpoint are ransomware attacks. And then 30% of our claims are wire transfer fraud or social engineering types of attacks. And a final 20 to 25% of our claims are malicious data breaches. So for ransomware, the number one way that hackers are infecting businesses' computer systems with ransomware is by sending employees a phishing email. And if an employee is moving a little bit too quickly that day and they accidentally click on a link or an attachment they weren't supposed to, that can download that virus on that computer system, and then it starts spreading. For wire transfer fraud claims, you know, just by having that business bank account and sending and receiving invoices and payments electronically puts the business at risk of a wire transfer fraud type of loss. So now we're going to dive down into exactly what is ransomware and what is wire transfer fraud. So ransomware has definitely been the biggest claim in this market that has really caused the cyber insurance market to harden. Now, there are a few common causes of ransomware, and as I just mentioned, the first and most common cause is via phishing links. So, you know, hackers could spoof an email, or they can gain access into an employee's email account and send either clients or vendors a phishing email where they can ask, you know, can you verify this attachment? You know, I've seen some where it looks like you have a voicemail and it looks like an audio file. One of the other causes of ransomware, and this is kind of a new trend that we're seeing, is hackers have been able to essentially exploit older versions of software. So if there's a business operating off of old legacy systems, or if they're using end-of-life software, so basically an older version of a Microsoft Exchange server or if a business is operating on an older Windows operating system, hackers have actually been able to find and create a backdoor and implant a virus on any business using these older versions of software. So that's why it's crucial to be consistently updating that software whenever those developers provide those updates. The third common cause is via Open Remote Desktop Protocol ports, or RDP ports. So a lot of businesses throughout the pandemic, shifted their employees to a remote workforce, and a lot of companies out there are using VPNs or RDP to actually allow their employees to access their work desktop remotely. And so a great analogy here is, if you ever need IT to come in and help you out with your any issues you're having on your computer, the IT individual typically will remotely tap in to your desktop. So if there is a business that has an open RDP port that's exposed to the internet, hackers are able to essentially exploit that and gain access into an individual's computer that way, and then they can start spreading their ransomware. But if there's one takeaway you guys have from today's presentation, it's that the #1 cause of our cyber claims is human error. So as a business owner, you need to be asking yourself, am I able to monitor what all of my employees are clicking on every single day they're in the office? Or am I confident my employees will never make a mistake? Now, what we've seen with ransomware is hackers in this day and age are getting very coordinated, and they are not necessarily operating by themselves. What we're seeing is hackers are forming these crime syndicates or hacking groups, and they are operating very much like a commercial business. And they're essentially utilizing ransomware as a service, which is their business model. So in this business model, you typically have a ransomware developer who is tasked with creating that ransomware virus. They go out and recruit a bunch of affiliate hackers who are solely responsible for distributing that ransomware virus. Now, these affiliate hackers, they make a commission based on how much ransom demand or how many infections are brought back to the developers each and every month. And they actually have minimum targets, and they can get kicked out or replaced from these hacking groups if they don't meet those minimum demands. So it's important to note that with these affiliate hackers, this is people's full-time jobs. And you better believe that they're going to be consistently updating their method of attack to improve their success rate. Now, a lot of these hacking groups out there have their own reputations. And when we come in to resolve a ransomware attack, our in-house forensics team, they can determine the hacking group behind the attack by figuring out what strain of ransomware malware it is. And essentially, we can help assess the situation, and we can see, if these hackers have a good reputation, meaning, if we do pay this extortion demand, if they have a good reputation, we have a better chance of getting that data back in an unobstructed format, and the hackers are actually going to do what they said they're going to do. This is why it's imperative to, go to a specialist IT forensics investigator to help resolve these ransomware attacks. That way, you're not paying a demand to a hacking group that has a low or a bad reputation to really help minimize the total loss incurred for that business. Now, in regards to ransomware, over the last 2 years, we have seen the severity of ransomware attacks skyrocket. So I mentioned that around 35% of our claims from a frequency standpoint are ransomware. What's really interesting is when you look at our claims from a severity standpoint. Ransomware equates to over 75% of all of the dollars that we're paying out in all of our claims. Now, over the last few years, we've seen hackers get greedier and greedier, and they've increased their extortion demand. So back in 2018, on average, hackers were requesting around $25,000 to regain access to those decryption keys. Fast forward to Q2 of 2022, the average ransom payment was upwards of $228,000. Now, there's a key reason why these hackers are inflating their extortion demands. And one of the biggest reasons is the fact that these newer strains of ransomware are starting to do a lot more damage. And basically, these hackers are utilizing a tactic now called double extortion. So in a double extortion scenario, the hackers will infect the business with ransomware. And what they do is they extract all sensitive information off the business's computer systems. They spike the extortion demand anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000. And then they threaten to release that information to the public as incentive for these businesses to pay these even higher demands. So this has kind of been one of the major reasons that's equated to why we're seeing so much more severe ransomware attacks, because now the business is faced with resolving a privacy breach on top of all of the traditional costs that come with resolving ransomware. And Coveware, if you guys are ever looking for industry statistics around ransomware, they produce quarterly reports, and Coveware, their average days of downtime over the last quarter was 24 days. So as a business owner, what kind of profits do you lose out on every single day you're down? The larger your revenues are, you could be looking at, a business interruption loss of $85,000 to $100,000 every single day. And so that's why it's so crucial in these cyber claims to react as quickly and as efficiently as possible, because in regards to cyber claims, time is money. The longer it takes for the businesses to get back online and at 100% capacity, the higher the claim or the total loss is going to be. So I mentioned that these hacking groups are becoming a lot more coordinated. Well, we're also seeing a massive push in the commercialization of these hackers. In this day and age, you don't need to be a criminal mastermind to get a piece of the pie. And what these hackers are essentially, they have access to is the dark web. So the dark web is a part of the internet where, traditionally it was used to send secure messages between military bodies. And now a large portion of the dark web has turned into this online marketplace. So it's basically an Amazon.com that these hackers have access to, where they can buy and sell anything that they need to pull off their attacks. So these cyber criminals today, they don't need to know how to write code to create viruses. They simply go on the dark web, and then you can, pay a licensing fee for a specific strain of ransomware. You can go and you can buy 10 to 15,000 stolen email addresses. Credit card details go for about $5 a pop. Healthcare records around $50 per record. There's a lot of tools that these hackers have access to. So, hackers have created their own CRM softwares. So it gives the hackers visibility on, who's clicking on or who's opening those emails, who's clicking on the links. Once the ransomware virus gets infected, there's other softwares that will show the hackers what extent of the business's computer systems they've compromised. So that way they can wait anywhere from 3 to 6 months to actually trigger that ransomware virus once they see the virus has infected the business's cloud files, their cloud backups, or even their on-site server backups. There's other softwares out there that will guess generic passwords. So it's a tactic that hackers utilize called a brute force attack, where they can run this software in the background and it will guess millions of generic passwords every hour until they gain access into an account. There's other softwares that are key logging softwares. So once a hacker infects a business, they can install a key logging software, will track the keystrokes. So when an individual is logging into an online account, it allows hackers to steal credentials. So why is the cyber policy essential? In the event of a ransomware attack, there are a ton of costs that can basically be accrued. So first and foremost, in every single ransomware attack, we typically see the incident response costs are triggered immediately. So the policy will cover the cost to engage 3 professionals. So a forensics investigator needs to be engaged to help come in They can determine the scope of the attack, figuring out, what information was extracted, or if any were. If information was extracted, then we need to engage a privacy attorney. But the forensics investigators will also figure out how to remove the virus and patch that security hole. If information is extracted, like I mentioned, we engage a data breach attorney, and they help navigate the legal waters, because each state has different notification laws, and we need to ensure that the business is notifying those affected individuals by each state's guidelines. And if they don't do that, then they can get hit with a regulatory investigation down the road. Obviously, if there is a data breach, the policy will cover the cost to notify those individuals and provide credit monitoring. And in some cases, we engage a PR firm as well, especially in the sense of a data breach, so that way we can help the insured notify those affected individuals to hopefully help retain those customers for that business. So these costs can accrue very, very quickly, because most of these professionals are charging anywhere from $350 to $500 an hour. Now, in the event of a ransomware attack, there's obviously that initial demand for an extortion payment. A lot of these hackers are requesting these demands in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and they give the business 24 to 48 hours to pay that demand. Otherwise, they threaten to delete the decryption keys. Now, as I mentioned, the average extortion demand is over $200,000. So that's going to be another massive cost that could be accrued in these claims. We're seeing some other hacking groups that specialize in double extortion, hitting businesses on average demands upwards of $400,000. So it's always important to note that, these demands could be all over the place. I've seen demands upwards of $2 million. So it's really always up to those hackers' discretion. Now, where we really start to see the ransomware claims inflate is when the business does not get access to their decryption keys, or there's aspects of their data that are rendered obsolete. Now, the policy will cover system damage and business interruption as well. So the system damage is essentially, we will cover the cost to recreate all stolen data, as well as help the business rebuild their IT infrastructure in an efficient and cost-effective manner. During that downtime, the business is not going to be able to operate. So the policy will be reimbursing the business for business interruption. So we'll actually be reimbursing those lost profits for up to 12 months following that cyber event. And then the final trigger or coverage that we typically see triggered in these ransomware scenarios is something called consequential reputational harm. Now, the policy will also reimburse lost profits for the business losing any current or future customers as a result of a cyber attack. So ransomware is definitely an interesting claim, because depending on the severity, we can see almost every single section of our policy wording get triggered. And the cost can be astonishing in some cases. So the next claim I'm going to be talking to you guys about today is funds transfer fraud, or wire transfer fraud. Again, this could be confusing because different carriers call it different things. We see a lot of cyber insurance carriers calling this social engineering or cyber deception, but essentially all it really means is wiring money to the wrong place. Now, in these scenarios, we have found hackers are most successful at tricking an individual in the accounting department to voluntarily send funds off to a hacker's bank account because they thought that that was a legitimate request from one of their vendors or suppliers. Now, in these scenarios, hackers are pulling off these attacks via a tactic called business email compromise. Business email compromise is where hackers will essentially gain access into an employee's email account, and then they will just do their research. They will monitor the correspondence. They'll figure out what upcoming payments need to be made, or what standing monthly invoices the business has with any vendors or suppliers, and they'll find the right time to strike, where they can then they typically wait till someone is on vacation. They will send the request to the individual in the accounting department, and they'll basically add a level of urgency, saying, the vendor has followed up for payment. We need to get this out today. But typically there's always a red flag. And that red flag is where, the hackers say they create some reason on why that vendor has changed their banking account details. And so typically in these wire transfer fraud scenarios, we're seeing hackers are targeting senior level executive officers, employees in the accounting department. We've seen hackers targeting clients and or customers, and even your vendors and suppliers. And so, you might not think that this will ever happen to you, but even the businesses that do have controls in place when transferring funds, people, we're all human at the end of the day, and people make mistakes. And so if someone is moving a little bit too quickly in the office and they don't verify that this is a legitimate request, they could accidentally send $50,000 to $100,000 off to a hacker's bank account. So why is a cyber policy essential? Well, as I mentioned, in a lot of these wire transfer fraud scenarios, hackers typically have gained access, unauthorized access into an employee's email account. So we always want to engage a forensics investigator to determine if those hackers actually extracted sensitive information from that employee's email. And if they did, then we need to engage a privacy attorney to help with the notification. Now, there's obviously going to be the initial cost if a business accidentally wires $10,000 or $50,000 to the hacker's bank account. And so this is where the cyber policy will actually reimburse that loss for an employee accidentally wiring funds to those hackers. Now, how to assess your cyber crime exposure? Well, most cyber carriers out there, base sublimits start at 100K or 250K. At Evolve, our typical sublimits start at $250,000. But a great way to assess that exposure is just asking yourself, what is our average wire transfer or ACH transfer? Or throughout the course of the year, what is the largest ACH transfer that we typically send out? If it's under that $250,000 mark, then the $250,000 base sublimit might be fine. If it's over that, depending on the industry, we can increase our cybercrime limits up to $500,000 or $1 million. There's obviously an additional premium that's going to be associated with increasing those limits. But this type of claim is happening all the time. So now we're going to quickly run through a few claims examples. So the first claims example that I have for you guys is a general contractor. So this general contractor of ours was working with a real estate investment company to develop a massive commercial project here in California. Now, this claim arose because there was an employee at the general contractor's firm that got hit with a credential phishing email. So hackers, what they'll do is they'll send an email to an employee. It'll look exactly like a Microsoft landing page, and it'll say, hey, it's time to reset your password. Or maybe it's an email that looks like it's coming from Microsoft saying there's a new security feature that you need to download to stay secure. And these spoofed emails look extremely legitimate. And so in this scenario, the general contractor received this credential phishing email to basically reset their password. And so the employee at the general contractor firm basically said, here's my username, here's my email, and then here's my new password, username and password. And essentially what he did or she did is handed over their login credentials directly to that cyber criminal. So now this cyber criminal has access to that individual's email account. And the hacker essentially just monitored for a few months. And they realized that the general contractor needed to pay around $920,000 to the subcontractor for work that had been previously completed on this project. Now, the hacker found that as the opportunity that they wanted to exploit. Another tactic that these hackers utilize in these wire transfer fraud scenarios is they add what's called a forwarding rule, which is a setting that can be turned on in the email account And what the forwarding rule does is any email coming in that has a specific domain or subject heading can be auto forwarded to the deleted folder and marked as read. So this is a tactic that these hackers are utilizing to operate, behind the curtain, so the actual employee doesn't realize that this attack is underway. So now what the hacker did is they found an old invoice. They used that as a template, and they basically sent an email to the general contractor's accounting department directly from that employee's email account. And they basically stated that the subcontractor recently changed banking vendors because they were going through an audit. So they need to send this across ASAP, so that way the project can remain under course. So basically what ended up happening is the accounting department ended up wiring upwards of $924,000 to that hacker's bank account. So in this scenario, we were actually able to recover around $361,000. What's important to note is with wire transfers, that money is gone the moment that you hit send. ACH transfers are a little bit more secure in the sense that there's typically a 24 to 48 hour holding period before the bank actually releases those funds. So the insured essentially notified us of a claim. We were able to step in and recover around $360,000 from those hackers or from the bank, but still the insured lost upwards of $563,000. Now, this really shows the importance of a cyber policy, because if there was not a policy in place to reimburse them for that $563,000 loss, the shareholders of that general contractor would have had to pool another $900,000 together to keep that project on course. And that could have been a $1.8 million loss if they did not have the cyber policy. And that could have been grounds to, cancel the project altogether. So for these construction companies, that's a huge exposure, as you are regularly sending and receiving invoices. The next claims example that we have is a nonprofit of ours. So this specific claim stemmed, this was a ransomware attack, and it stemmed from the nonprofit having an open RDP port that allowed the hackers to implant a virus on their computer systems. So this was one of the double extortion scenarios. And essentially what ended up happening is the hackers, they infected the business with ransomware. They hit the business with an extortion demand of $233,000. We ended up paying that demand, and then the hackers came back and said, we actually extracted 57,000 records, so you need to pay us an additional demand, otherwise we're going to threaten to release that information to the public. Well, in this specific scenario, the hackers ended up releasing those 57,000 records on the dark web. And so we ended up having to engage our forensics investigators as well as the data breach attorneys. And the data breach attorneys accrued massive costs, upwards of $270,000. And this claim is still open. And so the costs are still accruing. But what ended up happening is the data breach attorneys notified those 57,000 individuals. And then a few months following our breach notification, the business was hit with a class action lawsuit where the 57,000 individuals are claiming $1,000 to $3,000 in damages per record lost. Now that's 57 million to 170 million of potential damages due to this class action lawsuit. So it's a great example where, you always have to be thinking of the worst case scenario. Now this claim is probably going to be settling for a lot less, but this specific nonprofit, they were severely underinsured. They only purchased a $1 million limit, and so they burned through that extremely quickly. Now, in these types of scenarios, we're still assisting them on the resolution. They just don't have any more, available limits to cover the costs. So they're starting to accrue a lot of these costs now out of pocket. So what do all of these heightened claims mean? Well, over the last few years, the cyber insurance market has been rapidly hardening. There's been a massive, there's been a lot of pressure from carriers' reinsurance capacity to curb claims in any way possible. So what are these cyber insurers actually doing? Well, obviously we're seeing massive rate increases. So premiums are going up anywhere from 40 to 200%. And you know, that's on average across every single cyber insurance carrier. Because you know, the last few years, or the last 5 years ago, cyber was in a very soft market. But over the last 2 years, claims caught up, and claims always dictate the rates. On top of that, we're seeing carriers are increasing their deductibles, they're reducing their limit sizes, they are significantly carving back coverage. So one of the biggest things that we're seeing certain carriers doing is they're adding co-insurance clauses or supplements for ransomware events. This is why it is so crucial to always be reviewing the endorsements when looking at a cyber insurance quote, because these co-insurance clauses or ransomware supplements are a massive gap in coverage. And you know, it does not just supplement the extortion section of the policy, it supplements every single coverage triggered in the event of a ransomware scenario. So one of the really unique things about Evolve is throughout the hardening cyber market, we have been committed to continue offering the coverages that businesses actually need. So we have not compromised any of the nature of our broad coverages throughout this level of increased claims. So what are underwriters looking for? You know, being inundated with so many claims, cyber insurance carriers are starting to require businesses to have good controls. Now we're kind of beyond the point where having good controls gives the business grounds to negotiate a discount on the premium. Depending on the industry or the size of business that you are, having good controls is going to be the main factor to allow you to become an insurable risk in the first place. So multi-factor authentication is one of the easiest and relatively cheap control to protect a business. You know, MFA on employee email accounts for remote access to the network. So if you do use a VPN or a remote desktop, or access to your cloud or CRM software, as well as for privileged user accounts like IT admin. We've seen certain scenarios where the hackers actually gained access to the IT admin account and went in and deleted the insured's backups, giving them or making them more likely to have to pay that ransom demand. You know, multi-factor authentication, you know, both Office 365 and Google Suite offer MFA for free. So you really just need to go into the settings to turn that on. And then there's also vendors like Duo who provide MFA for all of your online accounts. So they're kind of a one-stop shop. Now, it's also crucial for businesses to have good backup procedures in place, because the easiest way and the cheapest way to resolve a ransomware attack is by restoring your systems from backups. So backing up your critical data on a daily basis is best practice. You know, if you do store your data in the cloud, making sure that those cloud backups, you have separate, segregated backups in different locations. So if one backup gets infected, you might have another backup intact. And then also securing your cloud backups by MFA to prevent the likelihood of a hacker going in and deleting those backups. Now, the business, we also recommend, can go one step further and have offline backups. So once a month, back up your data to an external hard drive, disconnect that from the internet. That way, if there is an event of a ransomware scenario, you know, we can likely back up from that offline backup, and we might need to just recreate data for a few weeks or a month. Endpoint detection response solutions is another control that we're seeing more and more cyber insurance carriers looking for. Now, endpoint detection and response, or EDR, is essentially like antivirus on steroids. Now, antivirus, we've seen a lot of issues with, because historically, over 80% of these newer strains of viruses are actually bypassing your traditional antivirus. And the reason because of that is traditional antivirus has a list of known viruses that it's known to protect against, and anything not on that list can sneak by that antivirus and still infect the business's computer systems. So endpoint detection and response is basically a computer software that gets downloaded onto all employee devices or computers, and it tracks traffic moving from each endpoint. And when I say endpoint, I just mean every traffic moving from device to device. And EDR can actually detect the spread of ransomware or viruses throughout a business's computer systems. It can then notify the business if it does detect a spread, and can help contain that ransomware virus to really essentially help reduce the severity of that claim. So endpoint detection and response, there's vendors like Bitdefender, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, all provide great versions of EDR. Also, that kind of ties into having a network monitoring solution. Employee training and phishing simulations are also key because human error is the #1 cause of our claims. And so constantly having these training to keep cyber top of mind for employees is going to help reduce the likelihood of businesses suffering those losses. And email filtering software is also great, so that way any spoofed emails or fraudulent links don't actually come into the employee's inbox altogether. And then we also recommend, having your internal, external IT team regularly patching systems as soon as those updates come available, or once a month having them search with the developers to see if there's anything that they can patch. That way it reduces the likelihood of them falling victim from a claim due to vulnerable software. So at Evolve, we have a ton of cybersecurity best practices PDFs. We have instructions on how to set up MFA in Outlook and Google and for remote desktop systems. So we will be sending across some of these cybersecurity best practices recommendations in the follow-up email today. But getting a comprehensive cyber policy is really going to act as that last line of defense, because as I mentioned, IT security is never going to be 100% bulletproof, and most cyber insurance policies today will provide both a proactive and reactive way to handling cyber risk. Now, a lot of these cyber insurance programs offer free risk management services, so tools that the insureds can utilize to help reduce the likelihood of a claim. And then they also come with a cyber specialist claims team to actually come in and resolve the claim in an efficient and cost-effective manner. So how can Evolve help? Well, as I mentioned, our program is extremely comprehensive and it's made up of 3 pillars. So we do offer 6 free risk management services where we can pair our policyholders with cybersecurity vendors to help reduce the likelihoods of claims. We have extremely comprehensive first-party coverages, and we have a very, very technical claims team. So some of our free risk management services that we offer, we do have an Evolve Response mobile application that our policyholders can download, which can be used to notify a claim. We also offer 24/7 dark web monitoring services. We do network deep scanning, so we can push notifications directly to our policyholders if we find any vulnerabilities that are specific to their organization. And then we also offer our policyholders a free phishing simulation. So once a month, we send basically the business's employees fake phishing emails, and if an employee accidentally clicks on that fake phishing link, they'll be prompted on a series of e-learning videos. We also offer a ransomware defense software and a threat analysis assessment via a vendor called Blackfog, and Ningio is another employee awareness training service. Now, at Evolve, I think the biggest value add of investing into a cyber policy is the claims team that comes with it. Now, we are not just offering our policyholders a promise to pay the claims. We are here to help resolve these incidents every step of the way. So back in 2019, our claims team actually acquired an IT forensics firm that specializes in resolving ransomware attacks. And they are based in Austin, Texas, and they man our 24/7 breach response hotline. So the moment one of our policyholders has a claim, they're immediately connected to an in-house forensics investigator that's ready to assist. Now, since we have these forensics in-house, we basically can set their hourly billables. So what used to cost us $50,000 to $100,000 on an average forensics bill now costs us around 5 to 10 grand. So it's allowed us to resolve these incidents much more cost effectively. Now, our claims team has also been handling cyber claims for upwards of 20 plus years, and we handle anywhere from 150 to 200 cyber claims each and every month. So if you're curious on how to assess your cyber exposure, we do have a data breach calculator on our website. That's provided through Net Diligence. So it's a third-party data aggregator where basically you can enter in your estimated record count or how many credit card transactions you process on an annual basis, and it'll pump out an estimated cost of that data breach. Now, these data breach calculators are only in regards to a business's privacy exposure. It does not contemplate the cost of a ransomware attack or a wire transfer fraud scenario. Now, our indication process is extremely simple. For most businesses out there, if you're under 50 mil in revenue, we do not need an application to provide indications. So all you need to do is email us business name, or have your broker at vendor email us business name, revenue, and website, and we can provide a cyber indication for you. So in summary, all businesses have a cyber exposure. There is no industry that is immune, and the majority of these claims come from human error. We've seen these hackers, they are getting better and better at making these attacks look more and more real, and it's getting harder to spot clear red flags to tell, what is legitimate and what is not. So in this day and age, it's really not if an attack is going to happen, it's when. So I do want to thank you guys all for tuning into our webinar today. So at this point, we will shift to a Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Bo. Fantastic job. And we do have some questions that have popped in. The first one being, many of our clients utilize an outsourced IT company or invest in IT security. Do they still have a cyber exposure?
100%. Companies out there, even the Fortune 500 companies, are spending millions of dollars annually on IT security, and they are regularly getting hit. And so I think it just goes back to the point that our number one cause of claims is human error. If an employee accidentally clicks on a link or a virus that they're not supposed to, that can still get into the business's computer systems. And, in regards to a cyber policy, your internal or external IT team, they're crucial and imperative for your day-to-day security, but they don't specialize in resolving ransomware attacks. A great analogy is if you needed to have heart surgery, you wouldn't go to your general practitioner, you would go to a heart surgeon. Your internal IT team is going to be kind of that generalist for your day-to-day security, but they might not always have the manpower, the resources to resolve these hacking attacks or these ransomware attacks as efficiently and as cost effectively. And they might not know the reputations of the hacking groups. And so, if you just relied on your internal IT team, they might not be able to know those reputations. And at the end of the day, you don't want to pay a ransom demand to a hacking group that has a bad reputation, and then you don't get any of your data back.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question that we have is, we accept credit card payments, but utilize the third-party payment processor to facilitate the payments. Do we still have a cyber exposure since we outsource the payments? And if so, is there coverage for this in the cyber policy?
Great question. So that's another misconception with cyber, where a lot of businesses do think that they don't have an exposure if they outsource payments to a third-party payment processor. Again, that goes back to the fact that the merchant business is legally the data owner that is responsible for protecting that credit card information. So if there is a breach, either on the insured systems or that payment processor systems, the insured is going to have a legal obligation to notify. Now, in the event of a credit card breach, the policy covers what's called PCI assessment costs and fines and penalties. And so in the event of a credit card breach, the business will have to reissue all stolen credit cards, which typically is around $7 per card to all those affected individuals. Then what's going to happen is the banks are going to reimburse those individuals for the fraudulent transfers that happened on those stolen cards. And the bank's going to look at where did the breach originate from? And they are going to then hit the business with chargebacks because now the banks want to get reimbursed for those fraudulent transactions. So basically the cyber policy will cover the card reissuance costs and paying 100% of the fraud that was charged on those stolen credit cards. Then there's also a private regulatory body called the payment card industry that can hit the business with a regulatory investigation and fine them up to $500,000. Now, the last point is I do recommend any business looking at the contract that they have in place with their payment processor. Typically in the indemnification section, the payment processor is going to push all liability back on that merchant business. And, I think, if the payment processors were assuming liability for all of the businesses that they process payments for, they simply would not be around today. So that exposure is still very much on that business. Great question.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and ask just one more question. And again, if we didn't get to all of your questions, we'll gladly reach out to you after the webinar, but we want to be sensitive to everyone's time. The final question I'll ask is, besides price, what should a business owner be looking for when choosing which cyber carrier to partner with?
Another great question. Yeah, so I think a lot of businesses are very quick to looking at price because I understand a lot of other lines of insurance are going up in terms of rate. In this day and age, it's imperative for businesses to be looking to choose a cyber insurance carrier that has stability and consistency in the marketplace. There's been a lot of new cyber markets that have popped up that are offering some sort of cyber program. Now, a lot of these newer markets, they copy wordings, undercut the competition, but then once they start getting inundated with a ton of claims, you're going to see much more drastic rate increases, and they might not be around next year as well. So if you do have a claim, you want to ensure that there's actually reinsurance capacity to pay those claims. Now, besides price, you also want to be looking at coverage because obviously you don't want to spend thousands of dollars to invest in a policy and then find out that a portion of your claim is either heavily sublimited or denied. And then also the final aspect is looking at the carrier's claims handling experience and free risk management services. That way you are partnering with a carrier who can resolve these claims because what we found is the carriers who have made technical investments into their in-house claims capabilities are going to be the best markets to handle these severe ransomware attacks in the most efficient and cost-effective manner.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Bo, for sharing with us today. We appreciate you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's Vendor U. As a reminder, this session has been recorded, and a link to view the recording and share the recording will be emailed to you following the webinar, along with a copy of today's slide deck. Should you have any questions that arise after our webinar has concluded, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. Thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks, Bo.
Thanks, guys.